Sathnam, I'll begin with you. You wrote a really brilliant piece for The Times when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. You acknowledged it was a big moment, but you described quite complicated feelings. Tell our listeners what you wrote about.
I guess you have to acknowledge that it's a big deal that we've got a brown prime minister because, in the imperial context, you have to remember that even in British India, Indians weren't allowed to do the best jobs. You know, Lord Curzon, the viceroy, famously said that there were no Indians in the government of India because there were no Indians amongst 300 million Indians who were up to the job. You know, Sikhs weren't allowed to drive the trains, and all sorts of racism was standard in British India. And that came into post-war Britain. You know, the Paki bashing of the 70s and 80s was more or less a sport in the Midlands. There were colour bars at pubs. You know, the royal family banned brown people from working in the royal household until the late 1960s. So in that context, a brown prime minister is a massive thing. But I can't help noticing that, you know, all the brown people in the cabinet and Rishi Sunak have signed up to a political strategy where they basically minimize racism, where they're anti racism, and they do almost everything they can to take on the woke and to make out that racism isn't a problem. So that puts us in an odd position if you do think that racism is still a problem.
Thank you for that, Sanghera. And I mean, do you feel that if you're a sort of brown person or a person of colour, do you have to be more to the right to succeed in British politics?
Yeah, it's a very odd thing, isn't it? Where the Conservatives are doing so much better on diversity, and yet they probably haven't got the same record when in terms of fighting racism, right? And yeah, I think the Conservatives have basically realised, you know, I think quite cynically, that if you have brown people making these xenophobic policy statements, they're less likely to be accused of racism. And I think it's quite a cynical strategy, but also it's to be embraced because it has led to more diversity in the Conservative Party. But I mean, I interviewed Baroness Warsi recently for the Times, and she was saying, look, what this means is that you get brown people in cabinet who feel like they can't bring their full personality to the table and they can't talk about racism and they feel like they've been silenced. They have to kind of shut out one part of their life. And I think she's right.
Although, Salma, I think one of the things, and obviously my political tradition, as everybody knows, is from the left. And, you know, Labour has not managed to produce the people in leadership. But I think sometimes people on the left, and a lot of my friends as well, we sort of think if you're black or brown, you're not allowed to be a conservative. But that, of course, is not the case. I mean, that's obviously not the case.
What I think is really interesting about this chapter in British politics is that it's an acknowledgement that actually there is no homogenous view within an ethnic minority community. Indeed, there is no homogenous ethnic minority community. I quite often say this to people who call me up, TV producers who call me up and ask me to opine on certain race issues. And it's kind of like, I can't talk with the experience of a black person in this country because my experience is very, very different. And so I think it's important that we accept that there isn't that one homogenous whole. I do think that one of the reasons the Conservative Party has done so well on diversity is that we had a steeper hill to climb, right? When David Cameron came in, and there was sort of resistance to this idea of tokenism, or, you know, as the Americans used to call it, affirmative action. And there is a part of me that still feels sort of slightly resentful at the idea that I can't stand on my own talent. It's got to be kind of, oh, she must have come in on some kind of quota. And I expect that there is something, you know, that where anyone in a senior position sort of thinks, you know, I'm here because of my talent, not just because I'm ethnically diverse. And I think that's important to register. But despite that, I think it was really important for the Cameron era to acknowledge that there was a real deficit in the Conservative Party in terms of representing Britain. And I also think that there is this generational shift. I know there's been questions about this on social media about Rishi Sunak sort of thanking the country, a country that he loves, and still that sense that there is an onus on you to be grateful to Britain when actually you've contributed to Britain. And there are lots of people who are not ethnic minorities who are born in Britain, who are, have the same backgrounds and the same histories that, don't have to do that kind of gratitude piece. So there's a lot of sort of, there's a lot of mix here, and even myself on certain issues I'm conflicted, but I think that largely I think it was really important for the Conservatives to take that on, to be more diverse, to acknowledge that there was a problem. I think it's really important that we've gotten to a place where we acknowledge that not everybody has a homogenous view, but also accept that there is still actually quite a long way to go. And even though I think we are probably better than most of our European counterparts, we're certainly better than America, there is still a lot more to do.
And it's interesting about what you say about that feeling of having to be sort of grateful. And there is also the kind of the frame of the good immigrant, isn't there, in terms of you have to be like a superstar, and all of us that have Indian parents are feeling the weight of disappointment right now in terms of but he's only 42. You're like, yeah, mum, I get that, thanks. I'm Roger, registered, noted, flagged, thanks. But Sathnam, the other thing that has got people talking this week is the Daily Show. Trevor Noah in America did this kind of skit saying about this huge backlash that Rishi Sunak had faced, and that met a lot of criticism, because I do feel, there has been some unpleasant stuff on Twitter, as sadly there always is, but I have actually felt like the reaction has been really, really positive, even from people who have got big questions. Like, you've a huge advocate for having a more nuanced, honest conversation about our past, and your brilliant book Empireland. But what did you think of that Trevor Noah skit?
Yeah, I think it was misjudged. But I feel that in a weird way, Rishi Sunak himself has been a victim of racism, very gentle racism, in that he was by far the most qualified candidate at the beginning of this process, and is put up against a series of utterly hopeless white candidates, and he still didn't get the job. It's not like the Conservatives rushed to give Rishi Sunak the job. It is now being claimed, that they really wanted him from the beginning. They gave it to him through gritted teeth, right? And it's that thing where brown people need to be absolutely perfect before being given half a chance. Sorry, Barack Obama. The guy is very rarely put a foot wrong, and he got a chance in America. And compare him to Donald Trump, but comparing Rishi's competence to Liz Truss, it's incredible. And I think it was an illustration of white privilege, the fact that Liz Truss could beat him,
That's a really, really interesting point, Salma. What do you think?
I'm so sorry to have to disagree with Sathnam on this, because I actually love all your writing and sort of nod along.
Well, you're allowed to disagree with me,
but I don't think it was that. Actually, I think it wasn't really about the white privilege aspect of this. I think it was that he just didn't sell the positive message, because there were a lot of people who really wanted it to be Rishi. And actually, if you look at the membership split and the way that it voted, it was a lot closer than I think a lot of people gave it credit for. But I just think actually it was a classic example of a campaign that didn't talk about hope enough and didn't talk about future enough. And Liz sort of trumped him on that. So I sort of don't necessarily buy that.
And also, lots of people do keep saying, they didn't like him because they didn't, he sort of called out Boris Johnson. Although, interestingly, he wasn't the only person. Sajid Javid obviously actually went first on that famous day. But just in the remaining time that we have, Sam, I'll come to you first on this. It's quite interesting that Rishi Sunak himself has not really spoken about being the first British Indian. Other people have paid tribute to him. Keir Starmer paid tribute to him at Prime Minister's Questions. Do you think he will acknowledge it, or do you think he doesn't want to acknowledge it because, as you said yourself, sometimes you don't want to be just noted for the colour of your skin or your background?
I think quite sensibly, he knows that he's got a really big job to do, and therefore, sort of lauding and praising himself in terms of the position that he's gotten is probably not striking the right tone. I think it's super important to acknowledge the fact that we have an ethnic minority prime minister, but in some ways, because we had so many people in cabinet and in lots of senior positions in the establishment, around government and around the country, it was an inevitability for me. So I think actually being focused on the job and the things that he's got to deliver, rather than being self-congratulatory about the fact that he's got a job, and it's like, yeah, great for you, Rishi, but like, what about everybody else? I think that's probably something that is sitting with the correct tone of what people expect from a prime minister at this time.
And Sathnam, final question to you. I mean, it's not true to say that no sort of more left-wing progressive brown or black people have done well. Sadiq Khan in London, very successful, actually at the ballot box. Rishi Sunak has not been tested as yet at the ballot box. But why do you think it is that the Labour Party is, even though it does have a decent number of black and Asian MPs, although not that great in terms of black men, to be absolutely honest, why is it that Labour, which is the party of, being progressive and equality, why is it that they don't seem to elevate people of colour into positions of leadership?
I think it's more that the Conservative Party are just absolutely brilliant at surviving. I mean, they will do anything to make sure they're in power, to such a degree that they will even appoint a brown prime minister, they've just got this kind of survival gene that Labour haven't got. Labour are more committed to ideology, right? But I think we need to also acknowledge that Rishi is no friend of progressive politics. We need to remember what he said during the leadership campaign. He was, he wanted to report people to prevent if they vilified the UK. You've got to remember he's reappointed Kemi Badenoch, who talked about the positive legacies of the British Empire, who challenged the idea there's institutional racism in the UK. We've got Suella Braverman, who also said she was proud of British Empire and claimed that Indians were overstayers when it came to visas. So I think we need to judge him by what he said, and he is pretty right-wing when it comes to these issues.
We will have to judge him by what he does, but there's no question. It was an incredible moment. It is an incredible moment in the story of our country. And it's been a real pleasure speaking with both of you. Thank you for your time.